Okay, so we have third person objective prior to this. Please take the notes on third person limited because it gives you the steps, step by step, on how to find if it's third person first. No matter if it's limited, objective, or omniscient, you need to know how to do these 3 steps. So you need to do that lesson first, titled Third Person Limited Notes. Then we move on to the objective. Now, third person in third person limited, objective, and omniscient, third person means the same. It means that someone is telling a story from the outside. They were not a part of the story. They're telling you a story about someone else. They use the pronouns he, her, him, she, his, hers, himself, herself, and so forth, because they're talking about someone else. They were not involved. If you're not involved, you usually don't use I, me, we, us, because I wasn't involved. So objective means, here's our notes here. Objective means we know nothing about how the characters are feeling and what they're thinking. So third person objective is a story that is told by someone that wasn't involved, and they do not know any of the thoughts and feelings or emotions of any of the characters involved. They're just kind of like a passerby that witnessed it or heard it hearsay. Now, if someone is third person and they're telling a story that they were not involved in, think about the information that might be missing in that story, like the character's feelings, emotions, and thoughts. So we're not going to really know that much about the background, and we're not going to know much about the story if we're reading it we're reading a third person instead of a first person. So that is something that we really need to take into account. Just like when I told the story in the first person video, I'm going to retell the quick story. Is there's an argument on the playground, there's a little fight, someone pushed, someone shoved, I'm involved and another friend is involved. If I go and tell the teacher comes up and goes, "What is going on?" And I say, "Well, this happened, and then she called me a name, and I was really upset because she was being mean to me earlier, and this is what I was thinking and how I was feeling." Then the teacher is really going to know the background knowledge of what happened, why it happened, what I was feeling, and all of the information that had to do with the story. Okay, so they really know what's going on. Now, if Sally over in the corner of the playground sees it going on and goes up to the teacher and says, this person and this person got into an argument, a fight, and she pushed her and then she pushed her back. The teacher's not going to know why it happened, how it happened, what happened before it, why they were saying, what they were saying, how they were feeling, what they were thinking, any of that. The teacher doesn't know. She's going to have to go further investigate. So that's how stories can change based on who's telling the story. All right, so we're going to read this story. I'm going to keep referring back to these notes. We're going to read the passage the first time to understand it. The second time, we're going to cross out the dialogues, so not the thoughts, but the dialogue. We're going to need a pen and a highlighter for that, for this exercise. And then we're going to focus on the pronouns, okay? These pronouns. And then afterwards, when we determine that it is third person, because we already know it's third person, but I want you to be able to tell me why it is told in third person, then I'm going to show you how I know it's objective, because sometimes there's a fine line between objective and limited. Okay. This morning, Mrs. Lois Boyd of 13 Archer Lane rode her bicycle to the local firehouse. There she asked for assistance in retrieving her cat Muffin from the large tree in her front yard. This sounds like a report of something that happened. The fire chief informed Mrs. Boyd that the firefighters needed to remain at the station. He said that the recent dry weather had made fire danger especially high. 2 of the firefighters, Jane Doherty and Bill York, were finishing their shifts, so they agreed to help. They grabbed a spare ladder and loaded it in Doherty's truck. They followed Mrs. Boyd to Archer Lane. The firefighters arrived to find that Muffin was very high up in a tall tree, very tall tree. Doherty, York, and Mrs. Boyd all tried making different kinds of sounds to try to coax the cat down, but the cat wouldn't budge. York then reminded Doherty that the last time a cat had been stuck in a tree, he had been the one to retrieve it, so it was Doherty's turn this time. Doherty shrugged, and the firefighters set up the ladder at the base of the tree. It was thick and with branches, so they weren't able to extend the ladder very high. Doherty started climbing while York held the ladder. Mrs. Boyd looked on with her hands clasped. Once Doherty reached the top of the ladder, she was about 20 feet from Muffin. She stepped out on a large tree limb. Immediately, a very large crack filled the air. The limb gave way. Doherty waved her arms to try to regain her balance, but she could not. She tumbled from the tree. Fortunately, she landed right on York, who broke her fall. The firefighters announced that they were unhurt, and Mrs. Boyd apologized for putting them in this situation. Just then, Mr. York exited the house in his bathrobe, yawning as if he had just woken up. He was holding a small can. He opened it and placed it on the porch. As soon as the can was open, Muffin scurried down the tree and started eating from it. "Well, that's a good trick," said Mrs. Boyd. Doherty and York, still on the ground, silently shook their heads. So, from reading this just, the first time, I really don't know. It's like someone is telling a report of what happened. There's no thoughts, feelings, emotions, oh my goodness, I can't believe she fell on me, and things like that of what the characters are feeling. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do the second step, which is cross out the dialogue. Right now, if I go down here, the only dialogue is right there, okay? Everything else is just saying this person said that, this person told her that, this person asked. There's no actual direct dialogue. It's just kind of putting it in a paraphrase. So now we're going to go and focus on the pronouns, okay? We're not looking at names. Those are going to confuse. Rode her bicycle. There, she asked for assistance in retrieving her cat Muffin from the large tree in her front yard. The fire chief informed Mrs. Boyd that the firefighters needed to remain at the station. He said that the recent dry weather had made the fire danger especially high. Two of the firefighters, Jane Doherty and Bill York, were finishing their shifts, so they agreed to help. They grabbed a spare ladder and loaded it in Doherty's truck. They followed Mrs. Boyd to Archer Lane. The firefighters arrived to find that Muffin was very high up in a very tall tree. Doherty, York, and Mrs. Boyd all tried making different kinds of sounds to try to coax the cat down, but the cat wouldn't budge. York then reminded Doherty that the last time a cat had been stuck in a tree, he had been the one to retrieve it. So it was Doherty's turn this time. Doherty shrugged, and the firefighters set up the ladder on the base of the tree. It was thick with branches, so they weren't able to extend the ladder very high. Doherty started climbing while York held the ladder. Mrs. Boyd looked on with her hands clasped. Once Doherty reached the top of the ladder, she was still about 20 feet from Muffin. She stepped out on a large tree limb. Immediately, a very loud crack filled the air. The limb gave way. Doherty waved her arms to try to regain her balance, but she could not. She tumbled from the tree. Fortunately, she landed on York, who broke her fall. So if you see the pattern, I'm going through and I'm highlighting pronouns. Sometimes we might have a mixture of them, and remember is if we have a mixture of third and first person, we always go with first person. If we have a mixture of second person and third person, that shouldn't be. I was looking at that one. So was is not one. There we go. Okay, so this shows that this is third person. So if you were to be asked how do you know this is third person? Because the narrator uses, because we're not talking about the author, the narrator uses pronouns such as she, her, he, their, they. So that shows that the narrator is not a part of the story. Okay, now we're going to go a step further and we're going to talk about the character's feelings and emotions and thoughts. Because if it's third person, I got to pick if it's 1, 2, or 3.